soul was a fortress of light beneath the winter sky, sharp and unyielding. But Miriam Lee felt like she was hiding in a tomb built from her own silence. She crouched in the walk-in closet of their Gangnam penthouse, knees pressed against imported Italian marble that had cost more than most people earned in a year, designer shoes casting angular shadows in the sliver of light from the bedroom. The silk of her dress whispered against her skin as she tried to control her breathing. Beyond the closet door, she could hear them, footsteps careful and purposeful, the soft click of a safety being released, the whisper of Korean spoken too low to make out words. The night should have felt safe. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River, security systems that cost $250,000, a husband whose very name made men step aside. But her chest felt too tight for illusions. Her phone illuminated in her trembling hands. 7 missed calls, all to one man. Hongwei Lee, her husband. Pause. Right there. 7 calls. 7 times he chose another woman over his wife's life. If you don't subscribe right now, you'll miss the moment she stops being the victim and becomes the villain he created. And when I tell you what she's been hiding in that closet for the last 5 years while he ignored her, you're going to lose your mind. Like this video if betrayal should have consequences. Comment, make him pay, if you're ready to see her take everything. Because Hongwei's about to learn that the most dangerous woman in Seoul is the one he forgot was watching. Now, will he answer call number 8? She watched the screen dim and checked again, as if staring longer might force him to answer. He didn't. His silence was loud, deliberate, and abandoning in a way that might actually kill her tonight. Please, she whispered to the empty voicemail, though the men hunting her were too close to risk even that sound. 20 minutes ago, she'd been worried. Now she was calculating how long she had to live. Earlier that evening, she'd convinced herself the increased security concerns were just business. Tensions rose and fell in Hongwei's world like tides. That was the story she'd told herself for 5 years. But crouching here now with her hand covering her mouth and shadows moving past the crack beneath the door, denial felt like a luxury she'd already spent. Because she had heard them arrive, not through the front entrance the way guests came. Not the way anyone should have accessed the 40th floor. It had been worse than that. Purposeful, cruel in its efficiency. The white marble reflected the bedroom faintly through the gap in the closet door, like a ghostly overlay. She could see the silhouette of a man checking under the bed, could see the tactical vest, the weapon held with professional ease. And she knew, with the kind of clarity that comes too late, that the protection Hongwei promised had always been conditional on him remembering she existed. Her phone buzzed with the 8th attempt to reach him. Across the city, in Minseo's apartment, she imagined it lighting up on a nightstand, ignored like everything else Miriam had become. Miriam learned neglect the way some people learn a second language. Slowly at first, with denial cushioning every misunderstanding, then fluently, until it framed the way she thought. Over the past 6 months, the house had not changed. The gates still opened with their obedient sigh. The guards still nodded without meeting her eyes. The marble floors still caught the morning light and reflected it upward, as if trying to convince her that brightness still lived there. What changed was the space around her, the way silence grew weight and learned her name. She marked time by what did not happen. Anniversaries arrived like polite guests and left without being acknowledged. Dinners were planned, postponed, and quietly erased, the candles melting down to wax puddles she refused to clean because they felt like evidence. When she spoke, Hongwei often continued typing, reading, or listening to voices only he could hear through his phone. There were moments when she stood directly in front of him, close enough to smell the sharp edge of his cologne, and he looked through her as if she were a reflection on glass, visible, yet not quite there. At first she explained it with care. His work demanded everything, and that was not a metaphor she used lightly. She knew what his world required. Meetings that could not be late, calls that could not be ignored, decisions that traveled faster than apologies ever could. Loving him meant understanding that attention was a resource he rationed, not withheld out of cruelty, but necessity. She repeated this to herself the way people repeat prayers they are not sure they believe anymore. Being ignored, she decided, was a form of protection. As long as he did not look too closely, she was safe. Safety lived in the fortress they shared. High walls, quiet corridors, a life insulated from the chaos he managed elsewhere. Divorce, on the other hand, felt loud and dangerous. Divorce meant questions, exposure, instability. Neglect could be endured in private. Neglect did not require witnesses. Still, the body notices what the mind tries to soften. Her shoulders tightened whenever his footsteps passed without stopping. Her sleep grew shallow. Her dreams crowded with conversations that never reached an ending. She began setting 2 cups for tea out of habit and clearing one away without comment. The rhythm became automatic, almost graceful, as if she had rehearsed it. She remembered when he used to see her. Not just glance, but really see. Her moods, her silences, the small shifts in her voice that meant she was tired or unsure. That version of Hongwei felt distant now, like a photograph left too long in the sun. She told herself people changed. Power did that. Pressure did that. Empires did not grow without cost, and wives were often part of the payment. Friends noticed before she did, or perhaps before she allowed herself to. They asked gentle questions she answered with rehearsed smiles. He's busy. Things are complicated. It will pass. Each phrase worked like scaffolding, holding up a story that was starting to lean. When she was alone, the story felt less stable. Alone, she replayed moments and wondered when absence had replaced presence so completely. The house was full of rooms designed for living, yet she moved through them like a caretaker rather than an inhabitant. She stopped rearranging flowers. She stopped choosing outfits with his preferences in mind. These were small rebellions, quiet enough to go unnoticed, but they mattered to her. They reminded her she still occupied her own body, even if he no longer registered it. There were nights she considered confronting him, imagined standing her ground, demanding acknowledgement. In those imagined scenes, he listened. He apologized. He reached for her hand. Reality interrupted those fantasies quickly. She had learned the cost of interruption. She had learned that asking for attention could feel like an accusation, and accusations were dangerous in a house built on control. Neglect, she realized, was not accidental. It had structure, it had patterns and rules. It rewarded silence and punished need. Once she saw it that way, she could trace its lines everywhere. In the way conversations ended abruptly, in the way plans dissolved without explanation, in the way her presence became optional. The architecture was elegant in its cruelty, leaving no obvious wounds, only erosion. Yet even erosion changes landscapes over time. Miriam felt herself shifting, adjusting her weight, redistributing her expectations. She grew observant. She noticed details she once overlooked, not out of suspicion yet, but out of habit formed by being unseen. When you are not acknowledged, you learn to watch. Watching filled the hours that used to belong to waiting. She still told herself she was fortunate. Many women lived with worse. Many women lived without walls, without security, without choice. Gratitude became another layer of defense, a way to quiet the unease rising in her chest. She did not want to appear ungrateful for a life that, from the outside, looked untouched by want. But gratitude could not replace intimacy, and safety could not substitute for being known. These thoughts crept in late at night, unwelcome and persistent. She did not yet name them as warnings. She called them moods, fatigue, restlessness. Naming would make them real, and reality would demand response. So she stayed. She adapted. She learned the floor plan of neglect and memorized its exits without using them. For now, she remained inside, convincing herself that this was the price of survival, that love sometimes looked like absence, and that being overlooked was a lesser loss than being cast out. What she did not yet understand was that neglect, once fully built, does not remain passive. It teaches, it sharpens, and it prepares those living within it for choices they never thought they would need to make. Hongwei always noticed the quiet first. Min Seo's apartment had a way of muting the world, as if the walls had learned how to absorb pressure. Outside, the city pressed in with its noise and expectations, the unspoken demands of people who needed him sharp, present, unflinching. Inside there was only her, the low hum of the heater, the faint citrus trace of the tea she never finished. He stood near the window, jacket still on, watching his reflection blur against the glass. In the organization, mirrors were everywhere. Polished offices, tinted car windows, the eyes of men who measured him without speaking. Here, his outline softened. He could almost forget what he was meant to be. Min Seo crossed the room without saying a word. She never rushed him. That, more than anything, was the luxury. She reached for his collar, straightened it as if he were about to leave rather than stay. Her fingers lingered, warm, deliberate. Not asking, not taking, just there. The phone vibrated on the table. Once, then again. He didn't need to look. He already knew the rhythm, the persistence that carried a name he had learned to set aside. Still, his eyes dropped to the screen. Miriam. The letters glowed bright against the dark surface, sharp and accusing in their silence. Min Seo followed his gaze. She didn't comment. She never did. She simply leaned in and kissed him, slow at first, a reminder rather than a demand. The kind of kiss that said, "You are here now, and that is enough." The phone buzzed again. Hongwei turned it face down and slid it farther from his reach. He told himself the same thing he always did, that Miriam was calling about something small, something procedural, something that could wait an hour. 10 minutes. A night. He told himself the organization would not collapse because he chose, just once, not to answer. The kiss deepened. Min Seo's hand moved to the back of his neck, grounding him. The tension he carried from meeting rooms and guarded conversations began to loosen, not disappear, but ease enough to let him breathe. In this space, time felt optional. He had spent years mastering control. Control over his voice, his face, his instincts. Control over the stories people told about him and the truths they never learned. Distraction was supposed to be a weakness. He had been taught that early. You survive by staying alert, by never letting your guard slip. Yet here he was, savoring the very thing he was warned against. Min Seo pulled back slightly, resting her forehead against his. Her eyes searched his face, not for secrets, but for presence. She didn't need explanations. She accepted what he gave, and more importantly, what he didn't. Another vibration. Softer this time, as if the phone itself were learning restraint. Hongwei exhaled a quiet laugh, more disbelief than humor. "She won't stop," he murmured, though he made no move to reach for it. Min Seo smiled, small and knowing. "Then let her wait." The words settled into him with an ease he rarely felt. Let her wait. In his world, waiting was a tool used against you. Here, it was an act of choice. He kissed her again, longer now, letting the moment claim him fully. The edges of his thoughts blurred, the meetings he'd postponed, the alliances he was supposed to manage, the careful balance he maintained between loyalty and fear. All of it receded, not erased, just pushed far enough away to dull their weight. The phone went still. Silence returned, thicker this time, wrapping around them. Hongwei rested his forehead against Min Xiu's shoulder, breathing her in. He thought of the way Miriam's voice would sound when he finally answered, tight with urgency, layered with expectations he had agreed to long ago. He thought of how easily one missed call could become a question, then a suspicion. But not yet. Here, he allowed himself the rare indulgence of being unreachable, not powerful, not needed, just present. Min Xiu guided him toward the couch, the city light slipping out of view. He let himself follow. The organization could claim him again tomorrow. Tonight belonged to softer things, to the gentle rebellion of choosing comfort over duty. Whatever consequences waited beyond this door, they could wait a little longer. The first sound is not the door breaking. It is the pause before it. Air pulling tight, the house holding its breath as if it knows what is coming and wants one last moment of order. Miriam is in the kitchen when the noise finally arrives. Wood splinters, metal screams. The front lock gives way with a violence that feels personal, like a decision that has already been made and is now being carried out without hesitation. She does not freeze. She does not scream. Her body moves before her thoughts can catch up, bare feet slipping slightly on the polished floor she insisted on waxing herself every Sunday morning. She turns off the stove without remembering doing it. Habit. Control, the kind she has relied on for years. She moves through her home the way one moves through a borrowed place. Careful, quiet, apologetic. The hallway feels longer than it ever has, the walls narrower. Each framed photograph she passes feels like an accusation. She had chosen every one of them with care. She had believed that taste and effort could anchor a life, could keep chaos on the outside. The voices come next. Male, calm, conversational. Korean layered with Mandarin accents she recognizes instantly. They are not rushing. That is what frightens her most. Men in a hurry make mistakes. These men are methodical. Hunters. She slips into the guest bedroom and closes the door without clicking the latch. The wardrobe still smells faintly of cedar. She had lined it herself, smiling at the neatness of it, proud of how complete the room felt even though no one ever stayed there. She crouches behind it now, knees pressed into her chest, phone already in her hand. Call number 8. It rings. Once. Twice. She knows it will not be answered, but she waits anyway, holding the phone to her ear as if proximity might change reality. Hongwei had promised. He had said there were lines, that there were rules, that this kind of thing was not done to wives who kept quiet and paid on time and never asked questions that could not be safely ignored. The call dies. A crash echoes from the living room. Glass. Her glass. The coffee table she imported, the one she had refused to insure because she told herself nothing ever happened to careful people. She presses her forehead against the wardrobe panel and closes her eyes. She can picture it perfectly. The slow, deliberate sweep of an arm clearing a surface, the sound of objects becoming meaningless on impact. They are moving room by room. She counts the steps between their voices, mapping their progress the way she once mapped escape routes in restaurants and hotels, back when caution felt like a game instead of a necessity. She hears one of them laugh, not loud, not cruel, just amused. The sound travels down the hallway and settles into her chest like something alive. She knows exactly who they are. The Choi Syndicate does not announce itself with threats. It arrives when the conversation is already over. Hong Wei had explained that, once, almost fondly, the way a man talks about a storm he survived years ago and now believes he understands. He had said they preferred certainty. He had said fear was inefficient. The wardrobe door trembles as someone opens the bedroom door. Light spills across the carpet. Shoes step inside. She can see the toes through the gap, polished, expensive, careful not to scuff the floor. That detail almost makes her laugh. Almost. A drawer opens, then another. Her folded towels are dumped onto the bed. She hears the soft thud of a mattress being lifted, the scrape of wood against wood. They are not tearing the room apart. They are searching it. Her phone vibrates suddenly, and for one impossible second, hope flashes through her so brightly it hurts. Then she sees the screen. No signal. She turns the phone off and slides it into her pocket, the movement slow, deliberate, as if the men in the room might hear the decision itself. Her breathing is shallow now, controlled in a way she learned long before she learned how to smile at the right moments or stay silent when silence was safer than honesty. The footsteps move on. She does not follow them. She stays crouched, muscles burning, listening as the sounds migrate deeper into the house. The study. The bedroom she shares with Hong Wei, or used to share, back when the word share still applied. She imagines them opening the safe behind the painting, finding exactly what they expect to find, and nothing more. She imagines the brief flicker of irritation that will follow. They are not here for money. That is the lie people like Hong Wei tell themselves when they want to sleep. A sudden crash from the master bedroom makes her flinch despite herself. A wardrobe door torn from its hinges. A mirror shattered. The sound of tearing fabric follows. Then something heavy being thrown against the wall. She presses her hand over her mouth, not because she is about to make noise, but because she needs the pressure to stay present. This is the violence he promised would never touch her. She remembers his voice, confident and almost gentle. You are protected. You are not part of this. You are a line they won't cross. She had nodded then, choosing belief because belief was easier than the alternative. Because belief allowed her to decorate rooms and plan dinners and pretend the house was only a house. The men return to the hallway. They speak softly now, the way professionals do when confirming details. A door opens somewhere near the back of the house, the sound of cabinets being checked one after another. The rhythm is steady, predictable, terrifying. She realizes, distantly, that she is angry, not panicked, not helpless, angry, at the mess they are making, at the assumption that fear will finish the job for them. At Hong Wei, most of all, for underestimating both his enemies and his wife in the same breath. A footstep stops outside the guest bedroom again. The door handle turns. The wardrobe door presses harder into her shoulder as the room fills with light once more. She can smell the man this time. Clean soap. Something sharp and expensive layered beneath it. The wardrobe shifts. Not opened, just tested. Her heart pounds once, hard enough that she is certain it must be audible. The door closes. Footsteps retreat. Only when the house falls into a different kind of quiet does she allow herself to breathe fully. The silence is not safety. It is assessment. She knows that too. The Choi Syndicate never leaves without understanding exactly what they have done. She remains hidden long after the front door closes again, long after the sound of the engine fades into the distance. When she finally stands, her legs shake. Not from fear, she tells herself, but from readiness. Her home no longer feels like a refuge. It feels like a message. And this time, she has received it. Hong Wei drove like the city had betrayed him. Red lights blurred into one long warning he refused to obey. His foot heavy on the accelerator, his hands locked so tightly on the steering wheel that his knuckles ached. The road from the airport to the hospital felt longer than it ever had, stretching and folding back on itself, every second thick with images he could not push away. Miriam's voice. Missed calls. Unheard. Ignored. Her name flashing on his phone while he lay half asleep, tangled in another woman's sheets, telling himself there would be time to explain, time to fix whatever small thing she wanted to talk about. There was no small thing now. The hospital rose ahead of him, white and unforgiving, its lights too bright for the hour. He barely remembered parking. He barely remembered walking through the doors. His body moved on instinct while his mind replayed the last few days in fragments. A delayed flight, a careless drink, laughter that felt harmless until it wasn't. He had told himself he deserved ease. He had told himself Miriam was safe. That lie collapsed with every step he took down the corridor. The smell of disinfectant turned his stomach. Somewhere nearby, a machine beeped in a steady rhythm that felt too calm for what had happened. When he finally saw her name on the board, his breath caught. Seeing it written there made everything real in a way phone calls had not. This was no misunderstanding, no exaggeration. This was damage. A nurse stopped him, her face neutral, practiced. Questions were asked. Answers were given badly. He was directed to a small waiting area, chairs bolted to the floor, a television murmuring news no one watched. He sat, stood, sat again. His phone vibrated in his hand, useless now. Too late for apologies, too late for promises. The detective arrived without ceremony, a man in a rumpled jacket who looked like he had seen this shape of regret many times before. He introduced himself, asked Hongwei to walk with him to a quiet room. The walls were bare. A table sat in the middle, a screen mounted on one side. "We need to show you something," the detective said. Hongwei nodded, though dread pressed heavy against his chest. The screen flickered to life. Timestamps appeared first. Dates, hours, minutes. The footage showed the front of their building, calm and ordinary. Miriam entered the frame, her posture tense, phone pressed to her ear. She paused at the door, frowned, tried again. The timestamp matched one of the missed calls on Hongwei's phone. Another followed, then another. He watched her check the hallway, her shoulders lifting with unease she tried to hide. The detective let the footage run. A figure appeared moments later, someone Hongwei did not recognize at first. The breach was quiet, efficient. No shouting, no dramatic struggle. Just a sudden shift. Miriam pulled out of frame. The camera catching only the aftermath. The door left ajar, the hallway empty again. Hongwei stared, unable to blink. The detective fast-forwarded, then slowed it again. "She tried to reach you," he said, not accusing, not gentle, just stating a fact. "Multiple times." Hongwei's throat burned. The room felt too small, the air too thin. The timestamps overlapped with memories he did not want. His phone face down on a bedside table, the warmth of another body, the easy lie he told himself when he ignored the buzzing. Shame did not arrive all at once. It seeped in, slow and complete, filling every hollow place inside him. It was not loud. It did not shout. It simply settled, heavy and final. The detective turned off the screen. Silence followed, thick enough to press against Hongwei's ears. When the man looked at him, there was something in his eyes that felt worse than anger. It was recognition. "This is what happens," the detective said quietly, "when you forget to protect what's yours." The words landed without force, yet they cut deeper than any accusation could have. Hongwei had no defense, no explanation that mattered. He had been gone, not just in distance, but in duty. He had chosen distraction over vigilance, comfort over responsibility. They talked logistics after that. Statements, timelines, next steps. But Hongwei absorbed very little. His mind kept returning to the footage, to the exact moments where one choice could have changed everything. A call answered, a flight cut short, a night spent alone instead of elsewhere. When the detective finally left him alone, Hong-Wei sat with his head in his hands. He did not cry. Tears felt too easy, too clean. What he felt was heavier than that. A reckoning had arrived, and it did not ask for permission. Hours later, they allowed him to see Miriam. She lay still, surrounded by machines that hummed and whispered, doing work his presence could not. Her face was pale, her hair pushed back from her forehead in a way he had never seen. He stood at the foot of the bed, afraid to move closer, afraid that if he touched her, the weight of what he had failed to do would finally crush him. "I'm here," he said, the words small in the room. He did not know if she could hear him. He did not know if hearing him would help. He thought of all the times she had asked him to be careful, to be present, to not assume that strength alone was enough to keep danger away. He had smiled, brushed it off, told her she worried too much. Now her silence answered every careless reassurance he had ever given. Hong-Wei pulled a chair closer and sat, his body finally still. There was nowhere left to run. The road that had carried him here had ended, and what waited now was not something he could escape with speed or excuses. If Miriam woke, he would have to face her eyes and tell her the truth. Not just about where he had been, but about who he had been while she needed him. If she did not, he would live with the knowledge that the last time she reached for him, he was not there. Outside the window, dawn began to creep into the sky, pale and indifferent. A new day arrived without asking whether he was ready for it. Hong-Wei watched the light shift and understood, with a clarity that hurt, that some moments divide life into before and after. This was one of them. Miriam woke to the sound before she woke to the pain. A measured beeping, steady and indifferent, cutting through the fog like a metronome that did not care whether she kept time or not. It told her she was alive. It told her nothing else. Her throat burned as if she had swallowed sand. When she tried to speak, nothing came out. Only a dry scrape that startled her enough to open her eyes. White light pressed down from above. Tubes tugged at her skin. The air smelled sharp, clean, almost metallic. "I see you." The thought drifted in slowly, settling with a weight that made her chest tighten. Then she saw him. Hong-Wei sat in the chair beside the bed, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like a man in prayer. His head was bowed. His face, when she focused enough to see it clearly, was arranged into something careful and sorrowful. The vigil of a devoted husband. The picture he wanted anyone who walked past that door to carry with them. For a moment, she said nothing. She watched instead. The way his shoulders rose and fell a little too evenly. The way his eyes flicked to the monitors before returning to her face, as if checking his cues. The way relief flashed across him. Not love, not fear, just relief when he noticed her eyes were open. "Thank God," he said softly, standing too quickly. "Miriam, you scared me." The word scared hung in the air, fragile and false. Her mouth tasted of blood and plastic. When she tried again to speak, her voice came out raw, torn, like it had been scraped along concrete. "Don't." He froze. Not fully, just enough. A crack in the performance. "You need to rest," he said, lowering his voice the way people do when they want to sound kind. "The doctors said—" "I called you," she said. The beeping continued, patient and steady. It marked the seconds he did not respond. "What?" he asked too quickly. "I called you," she repeated. Each word hurt. Each word mattered. 7 times. Her eyes did not leave his face. She watched the shift happen in real time. The confusion that wasn't real. The concern that slipped. The tightening at the corners of his mouth as his mind raced ahead of his expression. "I didn't hear my phone," he said. "I was in a meeting. You know how." 7, she said again, louder now, and her throat burned in protest. "I called you 7 times. I left voicemails. I texted. I screamed for help until my voice broke and you didn't come." The room felt smaller. The machines felt closer. She could feel the echo of that night crawling back into her bones, the cold floor, the taste of panic, the way her body had known before her mind did that something was wrong. Hongwei reached for her hand. She pulled it away. Something flickered in his eyes then. Not guilt, not shame, calculation. "I'm here now," he said. "That's what matters." "No," she whispered. "That's what you think matters." Her chest tightened as the memory sharpened. She remembered the way the room had spun, the way she had tried to crawl, the way she had believed for one terrible moment that if she just held on long enough he would arrive, that he would choose her, that she was still someone worth answering. She swallowed hard. "I wasn't unconscious yet. I was awake. I was begging. You had time." He straightened, his jaw setting. "You don't know that." "I do," she said, "because I saw the timestamps." Silence fell heavier this time. The beeping grew louder in her ears, each pulse a reminder that her body had fought when he had not. "I know you think you're good at this," she continued, her voice low now, steadier. "At being the man people believe. At arranging things so they make sense later. But you misjudged me." His eyes darkened. "Miriam, this isn't the time. It's the only time," she cut in. "I almost died, and you weren't there. Not because you couldn't be, because you chose not to be." That was when it happened. Not a dramatic break, not anger, just a quiet, unmistakable shift. The moment when he understood that the story he had rehearsed, the worried husband, the terrible accident, the bad timing, was no longer enough. She saw something die in his eyes. It wasn't guilt. It was control. "You're confused," he said slowly. "You've been through a lot. Trauma can distort memory." She almost laughed, but it came out as a cough that made her wince. "You always do that," she said. "You tell me what I feel, what I remember, what's real." "I'm trying to help you," he said, his tone tightening. "The doctors said stress could cause—" "Stop," she said. "Just stop." The word landed with more force than she expected. He closed his mouth. "I learned something," she went on. "Lying there, waiting, I learned the difference between love and habit, between care and possession." She looked at him fully now. No fear, no pleading, just clarity, sharp and clean. "You didn't come because you didn't think I could leave," she said. "You thought I would still be here, quiet, grateful, still playing my part." His lips pressed into a thin line. "You're reading into things." "No," she said. "I'm finally reading them correctly." The machines kept their rhythm. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse laughed softly. Life continued, careless and loud. "You can go," Miriam said. "I'm not leaving you," he replied. "Yes, you are," she said. "Because I see you now, and you know it." He hesitated, just a second too long. Then he picked up his jacket, smoothing it the way he always did when he felt exposed. "I'll be back later," he said. "When you're calmer." She didn't answer. As he walked out, the door clicking shut behind him, Miriam closed her eyes. Her body hurt, her throat ached, Fear still sat heavy in her chest, but beneath it all, something else had taken root. She had survived. And he knew he had lost the story that once kept her silent. Minseo told herself she was only going to look. Nothing more. She repeated it like a rule as the taxi pulled up to the hospital entrance, the word "look" carrying a careful distance, as if sight alone could not bruise. She paid the driver, stepped out into the washed smell of antiseptic and rain, and stood there longer than necessary, watching automatic doors slide open and shut for strangers. People entered carrying flowers, plastic bags, quiet dread. People left with stiff shoulders and faces that had learned something they would not explain on the phone. She had not planned what would happen if she saw her. The thought had stayed vague on purpose, blurred at the edges. Curiosity sounded cleaner than guilt, so she chose that word when she needed one. Curiosity about the woman whose name had been mentioned only once, too fast, too casually, as if it belonged to a past already sealed. Curiosity about the life Hongwei never spoke of. The marriage he described like a technical error, something already corrected. Curiosity about whether a wife could still feel real if her husband lived as though she did not. Inside, the hospital was quiet in the way that never meant peace. Shoes squeaked softly, machines hummed behind walls. Minseo walked slowly, not because she was unsure of where to go, but because slowing down gave her the illusion of control. She passed a nurse pushing a cart, a man asleep in a chair with his head tipped back, his mouth open in surrender. She followed the signs without reading them, turning corners that felt guided by something she did not want to name. Miriam was already in the hallway when Minseo saw her. She was walking the way people do when their bodies have betrayed them once and might do so again, measured, cautious, every step negotiated. A thin blue gown brushed her calves. Bandages showed at her wrist and climbed her neck in pale strips that caught the overhead light. Her hair was pulled back, but not carefully. It had the loose, tired look of something done by habit rather than care. Her eyes were what stopped Minseo where she stood, not because they were empty, but because they were not. They held too much, pressed inward, as if carrying weight was now a daily muscle. For a moment, neither of them moved. The hallway seemed to narrow, the air tightening between their bodies. This was not the collision Minseo had imagined. There was no raised voice, no sudden recognition followed by anger. There was only the shock of seeing consequence in human form. Miriam noticed her then. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The shoes that did not belong to a nurse. The posture of someone who did not know where to stand. The face she had never seen, but somehow recognized anyway. Understanding crossed Miriam's expression without changing it. Her mouth did not tighten. Her eyes did not flare. It was quieter than that. A settling. They stood a few feet apart, close enough to see details neither would forget. Minseo saw the faint bruise at Miriam's temple, yellowing at the edges, the way her hand hovered near the wall, not touching it, but ready, the careful rise and fall of her breath. This was the body Hongwei had left behind when he chose rooms with dim lamps and laughter that came too easily. This was the cost he never described. Miriam saw, in turn, a woman who looked untouched, well-dressed, alert, still moving through the world with the assumption of safety. She saw youth not in years but in expectation, the belief that things would explain themselves eventually. She did not hate Minseo for that. She was too tired to waste anything on hate. They did not introduce themselves. Names would have made it formal, would have demanded lines neither of them wanted to draw. They did not ask questions. Answers were already present, hanging between them with the weight of truth that arrives without invitation. Minseo's mouth opened, then closed. Whatever apology might have formed dissolved before it reached sound. She understood, suddenly and completely, that saying sorry would not be kindness. It would be a way to feel lighter without changing what had already been taken. Miriam did not need words to confirm what she already knew. She had lived it in her body. Hongwei had not left a wife. He had left a woman bleeding and called it absence. Minseo felt something inside her shift, a quiet collapse. She had told herself she was dating a man who had survived something hard, someone misunderstood. She had believed his distance was damage, not design. Standing there, she saw the truth with a clarity that hurt more than any accusation. She had been touching someone who had already chosen to disappear. She had mistaken silence for safety, restraint for depth. She had been holding on to a ghost who learned how to move without leaving fingerprints. Miriam took another step, slower this time, passing Minseo with just enough space that their sleeves did not brush. The closeness was deliberate, not to threaten, not to claim, to be seen, to leave no doubt that she existed, that she still did. As she passed, Miriam spoke. Her voice was low, even, shaped by careful breath. "He doesn't tell the truth," she said. It was not a warning. It was not a plea. It was a fact, delivered without emphasis. Minseo nodded. She did not trust her voice. Words felt unnecessary now, small beside what had already been exchanged. She watched Miriam continue down the hallway, her steps steady despite the effort they required. A nurse appeared beside her, offering an arm. Miriam accepted it without pride or shame. Minseo remained where she was long after the space between them reopened. Her chest felt tight, not with panic, but with recognition. She had come looking for proof, and she had found it in bandages and measured steps, in eyes that had learned what survival actually costs. She had seen the marriage Hongwei pretended was over, written not in arguments or paperwork, but in flesh. When she finally turned to leave, the automatic doors opened again, obedient as ever. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street reflected light in thin, broken lines. Minseo stood under the awning and let the moment settle into her bones. There would be no confrontation tonight, no dramatic ending, just the slow work of understanding that some men do not leave relationships. They abandon them. And some women, without ever meaning to, learn too late that they have been standing in the space where a life was already left to die. The penthouse smelled wrong after the cleaning, sharp disinfectant layered over old marble and money. It looked untouched, perfect even, but Miriam could still see where the stains had been. She always would. Blood leaves a memory, even when the surface forgets. Hongwei stood near the windows, the city flickering beneath him like an offering. His voice was low, urgent, carrying the same practiced softness he used when deals were about to fall apart. He spoke of mistakes, of pressure, of loyalty misunderstood. He reached for her hands as if the last 5 years were a misunderstanding that could be corrected with the right words. She stepped back. The refusal seemed to stun him more than any raised voice could have. He was used to resistance from rivals, not from the woman who had learned his silences so well that she once knew his thoughts before he did. He tried again, desperation cracking through the polish. He promised safety. He promised change. He promised her a life still wrapped in silk and glass. Miriam listened the way she always had. Calm, attentive, unreadable. When he finished, she said nothing at first. She walked to the console table by the wall, the one that had been returned to its exact position after the cleaners left. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a slim black notebook. Then another, and another. She placed them neatly on the table between them. For the first time that night, Hongwei went quiet. He stared at the notebooks as if they were weapons. In a way they were. She told him he had never noticed how she watched. How she listened even when she appeared bored. How she learned to remember numbers, dates, voices. How she understood that power rarely announces itself. It mutters, whispers, leaves receipts behind. For 5 years, she explained, she had written everything down. Meetings overheard from behind closed doors. Names mentioned casually over dinner. Transfers disguised as art purchases and charity donations. She documented the way his associates spoke when they thought she wasn't paying attention. She memorized routes, routines, and patterns. She photographed documents left carelessly on desks. She copied hard drives late at night while he slept, trusting that familiarity had made her harmless. She hadn't survived the marriage by endurance alone. She survived by preparation. Hongwei tried to interrupt her, but she continued, voice steady. She told him she had backups stored in places he would never reach. She told him she had timed releases prepared, contingencies layered upon contingencies. If anything happened to her, everything would surface. Not in a dramatic burst, but methodically, name by name, transaction by transaction, until the entire structure collapsed under its own weight. He asked her why she stayed so long. She almost smiled. She reminded him that exits take time, that safety requires patience, that women who leave too quickly often vanish. She stayed because she needed proof. She stayed because she needed leverage. She stayed because watching an empire from the inside teaches you where it fractures. The city outside pulsed, unaware that one of its quiet architects was losing control. Hongwei's reflection in the glass looked smaller now, older. He reached for her again, slower this time, careful. He spoke of love, of shared history, of nights that had once felt real. Miriam finally let emotion surface, but not the kind he expected. She told him that love does not require silence, that partnership does not demand blindness, that whatever they had shared ended the moment he mistook her calm for consent. She gathered the notebooks and returned them to the drawer. She told him he could keep the penthouse. She no longer wanted rooms that echoed with threats disguised as comfort. She had already arranged her departure. Her accounts were separated, her travel documents secured, her new name prepared. Every step mapped long before blood had stained the floor. When she moved toward the door, Hongwei didn't follow. He stood frozen, calculating, already measuring the damage. He asked her what she wanted in exchange for her silence. She paused, hand resting on the cool metal of the handle. She told him she wanted distance, not money, freedom, not apologies, and a guarantee that he would never look for her again. Not directly, not through proxies, not through favors owed. He knew better than to refuse. Empires are built on knowing when a loss cannot be recovered. As the elevator doors closed, Miriam felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, something quieter, steadier. The knowledge that she was no longer reacting. She was moving on her own terms. Below, the city continued its restless motion. Deals would still be made. Power would still change hands. But one empire had just paid its price. Not in blood this time, but in exposure. And Miriam stepped into the night, carrying nothing visible at all. Which was exactly how she intended it. 3 weeks later, Miriam sat across from Hongwei in the same office where fear had once trained her to speak only when spoken to. The room had not changed. The glass desk still reflected the city like a mirror that refused to blink. The leather chairs still held the quiet authority of money that expected obedience. What had changed was her posture. She did not lean forward to please him or shrink back to soften the air. She sat upright, hands folded, eyes steady, as if this meeting were a formality she had already completed in her mind. Hongwei studied her the way men like him studied contracts, searching for weaknesses, hidden clauses, something he could bend. He had expected rage, tears, or a performance of moral outrage. He had prepared for threats, for demands wrapped in emotion. What he had not prepared for was her calm. She opened her folder and slid a thin stack of documents across the desk. Not copies. Originals, bank trails, transaction logs, export invoices that never passed through customs, names he had trusted, dates he had forgotten. Nothing was highlighted. Nothing was explained. The power of the papers came from the fact that she did not need to narrate them. "I'm not here to ruin you," she said, her voice even, almost kind. "That would be a waste of time." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that presses against the ears. Hongwei leaned back slowly, his confidence adjusting itself like a man recalculating a step on unfamiliar ground. He asked her what she wanted. Miriam did not answer right away. She took a moment, not to build drama, but to make sure every word arrived clean. A full settlement, paid quietly and in full. Legitimate business assets transferred into her name, not shell holdings or favors that could be revoked, but companies with clean records and real balance sheets. A divorce filed and finalized without delay, without public theater, without attempts to frame her as unstable or ungrateful. No surveillance, no intermediaries, no sudden concerns raised later. "And in exchange?" Hongwei asked, though he already knew. "In exchange," she said, "everything I carry with me disappears when I do." He smiled then, a reflex born of habit, but it did not last. For the first time, he understood the scale of her preparation. She had not gathered evidence to scream with it. She had gathered it to walk away intact. This was not revenge. This was an exit strategy designed by someone who had watched him long enough to learn how he thought. "You think you win by leaving?" he asked. "I already won by surviving," she replied. "This just makes it orderly." That was the moment Hongwei saw it clearly. Miriam had never been beneath him. She had simply been operating under different rules, learning quietly, collecting leverage while he mistook silence for submission. She had lived inside his world long enough to map it, then chosen the door instead of the throne. The negotiation did not last long after that. Men like Hongwei respected precision. By the time she stood to leave, the terms were agreed upon, signatures pending, egos bruised but contained. As she closed her folder, she felt no triumph, only relief. The kind that settles into the body once danger finally loosens its grip. Busan greeted her with salt air and motion. The city moved without asking permission, cranes lifting steel, ferries cutting clean lines through the water. Miriam liked that no one knew her here. No one watched her for signs of disobedience. No one measured her worth by what she endured. She had rented an apartment near the port, modest but bright, with windows that caught the morning light. Each day began with simple routines she chose for herself. Coffee brewed slowly, emails read without urgency, decisions made without fear of consequence disguised as care. Work filled her hours, not as punishment, but as structure. One afternoon, she sat in a cafe overlooking the docks, a folded newspaper resting beside her cup. She had not bought it for herself. Old habits died slowly. Someone else had left it behind, and curiosity had guided her hand. Halfway through the business section, her breath caught. The article was brief, almost careless in its delivery. A clean acquisition, a strategic shift, a new chief executive appointed to guide an export firm into its next phase of growth. Her name appeared once, spelled correctly, without explanation or history attached. No mention of marriage, no whisper of scandal, just a woman identified by her competence. Miriam folded the paper and sat back, letting the sound of the harbor fill the space where fear used to live. She thought of the woman she had been, memorizing footsteps in hallways, counting money she was never meant to keep, documenting her life as if it were evidence instead of experience. That woman had not been weak. She had been waiting, A message buzzed on her phone, confirmation of a shipment cleared without issue. Another followed, a note from a junior manager thanking her for clarity on a decision that had been dragging for weeks. Miriam replied with brief encouragement. Nothing performative, nothing sharp. Authority did not require hardness when it came from self-trust. As the sun lowered, turning the water darker, she realized something that surprised her. She was no longer rehearsing explanations in her head. She was no longer planning exits from rooms she had not yet entered. The careful watchfulness that had once kept her alive was easing, replaced by a steadiness she had earned. She stood, leaving the newspaper behind, and walked toward the street with the calm certainty of someone who no longer needed to hide to survive. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. And if Miriam's silence, her patience, and her quiet victory made you pause for even a second, don't let that feeling pass without action. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next. Like this story so it reaches others who need to see themselves reflected in strength that doesn't beg for permission. And tell me something personal in the comments. Where are you watching from right now? A city, a country, a quiet room at midnight. I want to know. I read every single comment. See you in the next one.